A party woman inherits her estranged mother's castle, unaware that within its walls lies something sinister that could bring the world to darkness. Lavinia Whately prays at an altar but is interrupted when she hears growls. She grabs a whip and heads to a room on the lower floor, where she feeds a wild creature with meat. The creature gives part of the meat to Lavinia, but she lashes it cruelly, saying its fate is in God's hands. She returns to the altar and disrobes before it to flagellate herself while a man watches from the shadows. Later, the man frees the creature, which heads to the altar, only to see that the woman had died. The creature weeps for her before destroying her body and the altar she worshipped. Afterwards, the creature sees its grotesque form in the mirror and breaks the glass. Elsewhere, Rebecca Riley meets her boyfriend, John, who is talking to Shelley in a club. She glares at the other woman to make her leave, and John feels pleased to see her jealousy. Amid the crowd, the professor explains the notion of the multiverse to his group. Larry asks why no one has heard of it, so the professor mutters that the government hides them. Upon hearing this, Chuck talks about lizard people, who can appear as normal humans. Shelley comments on how strange this conversation is, which signals to John that he should leave. He takes a big sip of Larry's drink, but Rebecca stops him halfway and takes him to his car. The woman offers to drive since John is drunk, but he insists. Because of this, John struggles to drive in a straight line and ends up crashing the vehicle. At dawn, John finds Rebecca in a panic because she can't see. Months later, a blind Rebecca wakes up abruptly inside a car as they head towards the rural roads of Albania. Soon they arrive at their destination, where Marku, the caretaker, welcomes them both to Whately Castle. Marku guides them inside, and Rebecca can't believe that her mother used to own the castle. The man adds that her mother, Lavinia, owned the castle after her father died of heart complications. This shocks her, as Rebecca thought her mother had given her up for adoption because she was poor. Upon learning this, Marku explains that Lavinia was a recluse, so she might have thought it would be better for her daughter to live in the United States. Now that she has passed away, Rebecca is the new owner of the castle. John mentions that they plan to sell it, but Marku assures them that they should appreciate living in the castle. While the two talk, Rebecca hears a distant growl, but the men do not notice. Then, the assistant takes John on a tour of the castle, leaving Rebecca alone. Outside, Marku offers to help John sell the place and the furniture, but the fiancé assures him that his friends will come to see the place and help. John then asks how Lavinia died, and Marku hints that she whipped herself to death. John wonders if that will scare off buyers, but the assistant is sure that eccentrics are interested in buying old castles. He then asks Marku not to tell Rebecca how Lavinia died before rushing back. That night, as the two were getting ready for bed, Rebecca murmurs that she wants to talk to Marku about her mother. The fiancé objects, saying things are already strange enough. This dampens his spirits, so he reminds her that their friends will arrive soon. However, this doesn't cheer her up, as she sees her friends as people they used to party with. She no longer wants that lifestyle, as it almost killed her, so John promises her that they won't drink or use party drugs. John tries to initiate intimacy, but she rejects him. The man sighs and wishes that she will eventually forgive him for the accident. While they sleep, Rebecca has disturbing dreams of her mother whipping herself and a ritual where a man invokes Yog Sothoth while Lavinia is tied to a slab. A voice whispers that it will find her daughter, which wakes Rebecca just as a hand retreats from the door. In the morning, John is cooking breakfast when he stops, lost in thought until Rebecca appears. She mentions her nightmare, so John promises her that the castle won't seem scary when their friends arrive. Later that day, the two continue exploring the castle, leading John to notice that all the mirrors they find are broken. Finally, they arrive at an ornate room with carved stone walls and a gargoyle statue. Then, they pass by a wine cellar, but John doesn't mention anything to Rebecca, although he is clearly interested in the bottles. After that, they arrive at an altar where John finds the whip Lavinia used. Despite not seeing it, Rebecca starts to feel anxious and asks to go somewhere else. In Lavinia's old room, John opens a wardrobe and gets scared by the flies. Rebecca asks to try on one of her mother's dresses, so John chooses a red gown and comments on the smell inside. Unbeknownst to them, the creature is hiding behind the clothes in the wardrobe. When touching one of her mother's dresses, Rebecca cries for the woman she never knew. The next day, Marku visits them, giving Rebecca the opportunity to talk to him. She asks about her father, but Marku doesn't know anything about him. Then, he tries to convince her not to sell the castle, arguing that he grew up there. Sympathizing with his sentiment, Rebecca promises to consider it. As she sleeps later, Rebecca again has visions of her mother. This time, she finds her using the handle of the whip to satisfy herself while the creature watches. Unbeknownst to her, the same creature approaches her bed. Rebecca suddenly wakes up, gasping, and tells John that someone else was in the room. Because of this, they move to the living room, with Rebecca wearing her mother's robe to make herself more comfortable. She insists that she felt someone touching her earlier, but John assures her that there is no one else in the castle. Still, she asks what color her mother's robe was, since in her dreams she saw it red. In order not to frighten her further, John lies and says it is blue. He then reminds her that once they sell the castle, they will have a lot of money and a great future together. He then apologizes, still guilty about the accident that took her sight. In the darkness, the creature watches them as their interaction becomes intimate. With that, the creature is satisfied and slinks away. The next morning, John wakes up and sees Rebecca cooking breakfast alone. She has begun to feel secure after their time together, so she has decided to sell the castle as soon as possible so they can move on with their lives. However, later in the afternoon, John returns to the cellar and is pleased to find bottles of centuries-old wine. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rebecca hears growls through the walls. She follows the sound and reaches the ornate hall, but ends up colliding with a gargoyle statue that injures her. She falls to the ground, but before the statue can fall on her, the creature pushes it aside. Rebecca cries in pain and the creature tries to comfort her. When John finally finds her, the creature has disappeared. He tends to Rebecca's wound while she murmurs about sensing someone else in the castle. John dismisses it as squirrels, but she insists on leaving and letting Marco sell the castle for them. However, John doesn't trust Marco and adds that they cannot let their friends arrive to an empty castle. He also insists on not missing the opportunity to become rich. Frustrated, he looks around to secure the place. Meanwhile, John goes to another room and decides to call Marco. He tells him he's stressed and indirectly asks the man for some medication. The man simply says he will send someone. That night, as the two clean up, John makes an excuse. Rebecca pleads with him not to leave her alone, but he lies and says he has already searched the entire castle and found no one. Alone, Rebecca suddenly hears whispers from her mother. Following them leads her to discover an old tome inside the wardrobe. Elsewhere, John meets with the doctor, who offers him some pharmaceuticals. After the purchase, the doctor asks to consume his own products in the privacy of the castle. John refuses at first, but when the man hints that he has a weapon, he gives in and leaves the merchant alone. John then takes some of the products before meeting Rebecca, who is trying to research the book. He reads the pages to her and describes that it's in another language with gruesome images. Meanwhile, the doctor enjoys the effects of his supply and sees the creature approaching. Thinking it's a hallucination, the man speaks to it casually. However, the creature takes his syringe and stabs him with it. Upstairs, John inspects the morbid book but is only interested in selling it. Rebecca wonders if Marco can help translate it, but John says the professor can do it for them. The next day, Marco finds that the couple's friends are finally arriving, though he hides behind some bushes upon seeing them. John greets the group and brings them inside, where Rebecca joins them. Shelley greets Rebecca, but the blind woman isn't very pleased she's there. Changing the subject, John asks the professor to look at the book. The professor examines it and quickly determines it's likely the Necronomicon, a grimoire of spells. He explains there's a worldwide cult that follows the book's paths, but John just wants to know how much they can sell it for. To his delight, his friend responds that it's invaluable. Meanwhile, Shelley goes to the bathroom and reclines in the bathtub. As she relaxes with some wine, Marco watches her from behind the walls. He then goes to the altar and takes the whip before searching for the mysterious creature, only to be ambushed by it. Elsewhere, the professor describes the contents of the book to Rebecca, pointing out pages about dark gods like Yog-Sothoth. John exclaims he doesn't care and just wants to sell the thing, but both the professor and Rebecca are against it. Frustrated, John leaves to take his medication. Later, he goes to apologize to Rebecca for being a jerk. She accepts, but the professor interrupts them, asking Rebecca to take him where she found the book. Rebecca guides the professor to the closet in her mother's room, but while he searches, she has sudden visions of Lavinia being cornered and taken advantage of by her grandfather. Meanwhile, John and the rest of his friends go to a store in town to sell items from the castle. The store owner immediately refuses, saying everything in that castle is malevolent. She shares how the town believed the evil had ended when Lavinia perished, but their livestock are still being devoured alive at night. She fears the demon's offspring has returned and urges the man to leave the castle. John is not dissuaded by this, so the woman warns him about the dark forces in that castle. Then the men gather by the windows to observe the newcomers, but the woman shouts at the crowd, causing the group to withdraw. In an effort to get to the bottom of things, John calls the estate manager and discovers that the castle is not for sale, and Marco is not assigned as caretaker of the property. Unbeknownst to them, Marco is chained up while the creature feeds on the doctor's body. The grotesque being tries to feed its guest as well, but when he rejects it, it bites him and leaves. Later, John is frustrated that his friends are using substances in front of his girlfriend, claiming she can sense those things despite being blind. However, they ignore him. While they enjoy themselves, the professor tells Rebecca how cults want to bring back the ancient gods to this world. The woman suspects her grandfather is part of these cults. Listening to them, John abruptly responds to the professor, insisting that this talk about cults is nonsense. Rebecca wonders what's going on, and her boyfriend says he's just tired. The woman retorts sharply, pointing out that she's also dealing with this issue while being blind. John mentions he's been there for her, but she argues that he doesn't even listen when she says there's someone in the walls, unlike the professor who is willing to listen and learn. Shelley hears this and gets scared, but John dismisses it as hysteria. This offends Rebecca, so she pushes John, declaring that her life is a mystery and he should step aside if he can't help solve it. The blind woman then leaves with the professor, leaving John sunk in guilt. Shelley takes advantage of this change to reassure John and flirt with him, offering wine to ease the stress. Meanwhile, the creature watches them from behind the walls. Rebecca and the professor head to Lavinia's room to check the closet again. She asks for her mother's robe, and the man asks if it's the red one, confirming that John had lied to him earlier. While the professor investigates the wardrobe, he discovers a secret passage. He enters, and Rebecca follows him wearing her mother's robe. Meanwhile, John and the others celebrate by drinking bottles of old wine. John appreciates Shelley's carefree demeanor, prompting her to request a tour of the castle. Understanding what she really wants, he accepts Shelley's offer. Through the hidden corridors of the castle, Rebecca and the professor hear a growl, which the woman confirms having heard before. Meanwhile, Shelley and John passionately enjoy each other's company. They find handcuffs on the headboard of a bed, and the woman playfully handcuffs and blindfolds her partner. She tosses the keys before taking control of the situation, all while the creature watches from a wardrobe. Seizing an opportunity, the creature slithers out and twists Shelley's neck, ending her life. Completely unaware, John is in ecstasy, even as the grotesque creature takes Shelley's place. After the act, John screams for help, thinking Shelley left him handcuffed and blindfolded. Eventually, Larry and Chuck arrive to free him. To their horror, they also find Shelley's body. Terrified, John dresses and vows to end this madness. In the castle dungeon, Rebecca and the professor discover the creature's lair and its notebooks. From them, they learn that Lavinia's father allowed himself to be possessed by a monster, which used his body to impregnate Lavinia. Their children would be capable of opening the door to allow the return of the ancients. She gave birth to twin daughters, one marked by the monster and the other unknown, so Lavinia separated them. Meanwhile, John and his friends explore the castle and eventually hear Marco shouting for help. They free the chained man while Chuck finds the doctor's weapon. Marco exclaims frantically that they must stop the creature and escape the castle, but John declares that the property is his, so he won't allow the creature to drive him out. Later, he gathers the three of them and urges them to begin the hunt for the creature. Inside the lair, Rebecca tries to make sense of her grandfather's actions, thinking he brainwashed Lavinia only to use her. The professor sees things differently and suggests they leave. Outside, the villagers start hearing whispers from the sky, and one of them murmurs about the prophecy. Because of this, they head towards the castle. Inside, John and the three head to the altar and pick up weapons from the chest. They agree to split up to hunt the creature, and John takes a stimulant before darting off. Within the inner walls, Rebecca and the professor traverse a narrow tunnel when they hear screams. The professor goes to investigate, leaving Rebecca alone. The creature slowly approaches her. She turns around and realizes it's her sister. As she touches her hands, she hears Lavinia's voice stopping her, causing the creature to flee. Elsewhere, Chuck and Larry explore another part of the castle, only to be ambushed by the beast. In another tunnel, the professor discovers a brightly lit red room where he finds the creature writhing. He approaches cautiously and opens the book before her, asking her to reveal Yog-Sothoth to him. The creature convulses, and suddenly a tentacle shoots out from its belly and strangles the professor. Despite the suffocation, he smiles and declares that he can see everything. Meanwhile, Rebecca convulses as she sees visions of her mother lying on a stone slab. Before her, Two hooded worshippers guide a monstrous man towards her. Then, a distorted appendage bursts from her belly and implants its essence within her. Rebecca breaks the vision and flees. Elsewhere, John frantically hunts the creature, but Marco suddenly strikes his leg with a spiked mace. He reveals that he was ordered by Yog-Sothoth to unite the sisters, so he had to end Lavinia to prevent her interference. He proclaims the glory of the old god and raises his mace to finish John. However, the creature knocks him down and kills him, giving John time to escape. The man heads outside to a clearing and shouts, challenging the creature. She appears, and they confront each other, exchanging blows. One manages to bring her down to the ground, but the beast strikes him before he can attack again. With one on the ground, the creature raises the mace, but Rebecca reaches them. Suddenly, both she and the creature convulse, giving one the opportunity to grab the mace and strike the creature repeatedly. Rebecca breaks the trance and shouts at one to stop, revealing that the creature is her sister. Despite this, he throws down the mace and picks up the whip. Furious, he exclaims that they are both monsters before whipping Rebecca. This forces her to defend herself and strike him with the mace. She recoils in horror at what she has done. However, her sister crushes one's head in rage and calls for Rebecca to follow her. Elsewhere, the professor emerges from the castle with the book. The sky rips open in otherworldly colors as villagers gather in front of the castle. The professor declares that the prophecy has been fulfilled and shouts for Rebecca and her sister to join hands. The creature takes Rebecca's hand and lifts it towards the sky as the image of a dark god manifests before them. Rebecca screams in agony as blood pours from her and gives birth to Yog-Sothoth in the mortal realm. If you liked the summary, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. It's free and really helps me keep growing.